Hi everyone, and welcome back. I'm Professor Seth Monahan, and this is video number 8 in my series on the basics of classical harmony and counterpoint. Today we're going to be learning all about seventh chords. Now, what is a seventh chord? A seventh chord is a 4-note chord built from 3 stacked thirds. Another way of thinking about this is that a seventh chord is like a triad with an extra note. It's one that sits a third above the chordal fifth. Now, before we get into any details, I should say this whole topic is actually really just an extension of what we learned about triads in video 5. If you've got a solid grasp on what we did there, if you're comfortable building triads of different qualities, assigning Roman numerals to them and inverting them, if you're comfortable with all that, this topic shouldn't pose any major hurdles. It's just a bunch of new information. Let's start by looking at the various seventh chord qualities. And we're going to move through these by taking various triads and then adding thirds on top of them. So let's start with a diminished triad as our base triad. If we add a minor third to the top of a diminished triad, we get the chord shown here, which I've built up with A as the root. Here's a diminished triad, and here's a minor third on top of that. And the official name for this is a diminished seventh, or DD seventh for short. This tells us that we've taken a diminished triad and added a note, a diminished seventh above the bass. In this case, that's the G flat that lies a diminished seventh above A natural. But musicians normally just shorten this to diminished seventh. That's what I'm calling its casual name. And it turns out that all the seventh chords we're going to look at here effectively have two names. There's an official name that falls in the column labeled quality, and then the more casual name, which is the one that musicians actually tend to use and the one that I'll be using in these videos. So let's look at what happens when we take a diminished triad and add a major third on top of it. Here's a chord that sounds like this. Now we have G natural. The quality of this one is called diminished minor seventh, meaning a diminished seventh with a minor seventh above its bass. The casual name for this is a half diminished seventh chord. So we had a diminished seventh and then a half diminished. Then we can build a few chords with minor triads as the bass triad as well. So if you take a minor triad and you add a minor third on top, looks like this, sounds like this. The quality is a minor seventh. Minor triad, minor seventh above the root. Not a huge surprise, the casual name is minor seventh. Now if you take a minor triad and add a major third above it, you get this really cool chord, technically called a minor major seventh. Unfortunately, this doesn't have a casual name because it's never used in the classical style. It's not really going to be a thing until the 20th century. So we have to say goodbye to that beautiful chord and move on to the ones that have major triads as their base. So major triad plus a minor third gives us this, called a major minor seventh, and its colloquial name is dominant seventh. That's what we call chords that sound like that. You'll know why in the next screen. And then finally, take a major triad, add a major third on top. You have this beautiful chord, which is a major seventh, shortens to major seventh. And as with triads, I've ordered the chords here because with every one, you raise a note from the previous one. So if you start with a fully diminished seventh chord at the top, you raise the top note, becomes half diminished, raise the chordal fifth, you have a minor seventh, raise the chordal third, you have a dominant seventh, and raise the seventh once again, major seventh. So that's the logic behind their ordering here. Now let's look at seventh chords in keys. So as with triads, we can build seventh chords on every scale degree. And there are 4 types that occur in major. Here's the D major scale with each note having 3 thirds stacked above it. So it sounds like this. Now 2 of these chords will be major seventh chords. That's the tonic chord and the chord built on 4. So uppercase Roman numeral with the 7. 3 of them, those built on scale degrees 2, 3, and 6, are minor seventh chords. And those we show with the lowercase Roman numeral with the integer 7 next to it. The chord built on scale degree 7 gives us a half diminished seventh chord. And the way we show that is with a lowercase Roman numeral, a circle with a slash through it, and then a 7. Now, finally, the chord built above scale degree 5 has a quality that you'll notice occurs nowhere else in the key. Officially, it's a major minor seventh chord, but in practice, people virtually always call this sonority a dominant seventh chord because it's so strongly associated with the chord built on the dominant scale degree. In a moment, we'll see this is true in minor as well. The vast majority of major minor sevenths we hear in minor are also built above scale degree 5. Now also notice that of the 5 types of 7th chords we looked at in the last screen, only 4 of them appear here. There are no fully diminished 7th chords that occur naturally in a major key. For those, we have to go to the minor key. Now, as with triads, things are going to be a little more complicated in minor because of the different versions of 6 and 7 that appear in the melodic minor scale. And I'm going to omit the options that we rarely use. So I'm just going to show the commonly used chords here. And in fact, we're not going to see any raised scale degree 6 at all. So here are 7th chords built on all the notes of a D minor scale. Now we have minor 7th chords occurring on scale degrees 1 and 4. Major 7th chords on 3 and 6. A single half diminished 7th chord on scale degree 2. And then 2 chords built on the 2 different versions of scale degree 7. On the left, we have the chord built above the subtonic note. That's scale degree 7 in natural minor. And its quality is a dominant 7th, a major minor 7th, and it gets a big Roman numeral 7 with the integer 7, whereas the chord built above the raised leading tone of harmonic minor is a fully diminished 7th chord, and its Roman numeral is a small 7 with a little circle telling us it's diminished, and then a 7th symbol. Now, as you might expect, these 2 chords built on 7 have different functional names as well. All the other chords in this key will have one functional name. They're the same ones for major. However, the chord with C in the bass here is called the subtonic 7th, whereas the chord with C sharp in the bass is called the leading tone 7th. Now, also notice there's only one version of 5 here. We always use the raised leading tone if we have a dominant 7th chord in this key. There is no minor 7th chord on the dominant with a C natural. Just like in major, whenever we have a 7th chord built with 5 as its root, it is a dominant quality 7th chord with a raised leading tone, uppercase Roman numeral. So our next task is going to be to invert 7th chords. And if you understand triad inversion, there shouldn't be any problem here, because the same principles apply. We're just adding one more chord degree, which means there are now 4 permutations rather than 3. So here's a B major minor 7th chord, what we call a B dominant 7th, and it's in 4 different inversions. The one on the left has a root in the bass and is thus called the root position dominant 7th. The second one has the chordal 3rd, D sharp, in the bass. That's in 1st inversion. Put the chordal 5th, F sharp in the bass. We get 2nd inversion. Put the chordal 7th in the bass, and now we have 3rd inversion. Remember, there was no 3rd inversion triad. It was just root position, 1st inversion, 2nd inversion. The figure bass for these gets a little bit complicated, but I think you'll be able to manage. The unabbreviated bass figures are a lot to memorize, but if we just look at these chords in close position, we'll see why they are what they are. The one on the left, root position, the unabbreviated figures are 7, 5, 3, and you can see it right there in the closed position chord. There's a 7th, a 5th, and a 3rd above the bass. 1st inversion, take a second to look at that chord and imagine what the integers of the figured bass might be. Hopefully you see that it's 6, 5, 3. There's a 6th above the bass, D sharp, a 5th above the bass, D sharp, and a 3rd above the bass, D sharp. And again, this is presuming we're in a key that has F sharp and D sharp in the signature. 2nd inversion, 6, 4, 3. Again, corresponds to our little closed position stack there. And 3rd position is 6, 4, 2. Now, these are a lot of numbers to remember. Thankfully, the abbreviations are short and they make a certain kind of internal sense. The abbreviations moving from left to right are just 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and 4, 2. Now, the pattern that you should notice here is that if you read them off in order, you're counting backwards from 7 with just a little blip between 3 and 2. So 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and 4, 2. These are the abbreviations we're going to use in these videos. These are fairly universal. So that's all we need to know for now about 7th chords. It's important that you remember your figured bass abbreviations and that you know your qualities both by sight and sound, with sound probably being more important. In our next video, we're going to pause to take stock of all the different numbers we've seen in our music theoretical notation so far to really clarify and tighten the screws and make sure we're comfortable with all these various numbers we're using before we move on to more advanced topics. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.